Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with our guest today. His name is Travis Schachtner. He joins us from Wisconsin. He is an ethical employment advocate. He has a doctorate and teaches at a college. We will be talking about several topics today, especially when it comes to ethics and the four pillars of ethics. And before I go any further, please help me welcome him to the show. Hi, Travis.
Hi, thank you for having me. I
Thank you
can't
for
wait to
being
talk to
here.
you.
I'm excited as well. Thanks for being on our show. Welcome. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Um, my name is Travis Schachtner. Yeah, I have a doctorate in career and technical education leadership and a bachelor's and a master's in leadership. And my research is more into, instead of a top down view of leadership, it's a bottom up and trying to flip the scale on its head. Um, I wrote a book based on that understanding called Employment Ethics, Redefining the Employer-Employee Relationship, in where I try to answer the question if we can allow all employers to make a basic demand of a level of work ethic, it's only fair in any relationship that both parties make an equal demand. So what could be the demand of all employees be able to demand from all employers to maintain a successful balanced relationship.
That would
So
be ideal
that's
indeed. Yes. But
yep.
before we get into the nitty-gritties, let's get started. You have all these qualifications on leadership and your research is on leadership. Why specifically leadership?
Um my that actually comes from my family. we
Mm,
My family is a big education advocate. Like you should we everyone in my family has my brothers and sisters have at least an associate's degree. I'm the oldest of six. I have attained the highest level of education in the entire family, but I have multiple. Both my sisters have master's degrees. My brothers are all like constantly going back into education to get certifications and everything else in what they pursue, and it's always been you start with your job, like your fallback plan, that's your associate's degree, and then from there, if you pursue anything else, that's your passion. So my I always looked at leadership as it's basically applied philosophy. You need to understand what you're standing for in order to be a leader. So you have to have a philosophy behind what you're pursuing. And you have to have a philosophy behind in order to get people to follow you. So it instead of just going the philosophy route, I started going for my bachelor's in leadership and then into my master's and just continuing down that path. And uh, I'm also a veteran. Wisconsin has some pretty solid veterans benefits, and it's hard to say, hey, like I can get my doctorate through my veterans benefits. I
mm.
you it
So you
Once
don't
you
have to
say
have
the
student
cost is
loans.
removed, yep.
Yes.
Once that cost is removed, it's really hard to say I don't want to continue.
Mm.
So the dissertation I completed was in employment ethics, establishing it, and then developing a formula for an ethical wage, which is one that can be honestly budgeted based on government data. Like it's supposed to be easily accessible. This is a simple budgetable wage based on what current budgeting practices are, which is following a 50/30/20 rule. Um,
Which
fifty
is?
percent of your 50% of your wages goes to your needs, 30% of your wages goes to your wants, 20% of your wages goes to savings, and then that should be that's what you how you spend your take home pay.
Mm-hmm.
It was established in the aughts by Elizabeth Warren, and in in her book, it's leaving me off the top of my head the name of it, but it's been a followed practice because it was simplicity in its design. This is how, if you're doing it right, 50, 30, 20, and then like how you move the money around. Like if you want a nicer car, so you take out a loan, well, you got to make sure that your financial health is maintained, so that loan goes into your need instead of a want. But you're making the sacrifice of future wants in order to meet that. And
Mm.
it was an interesting way to look at things, but it laid a foundational groundwork in that. Now with that, I can say, okay, um, what can we actually say is the core needs, right? So my framework was around um, someone who's willing to work with minimal uh, schooling. So my framework was a high school dropout with a criminal record who's like wants to turn their life around, who's an orphan. That person, if they're willing to work what we say is full time, they should be able to afford a single bedroom apartment. They should be able to afford meals every day, go out and transportation to and from work, because your employer wants you there, so they should pay for your gas,
Mm.
right? So that's 20 average American travels 20 miles to work, 40 miles round trip. So then now the government collects the data for average apartment costs. They collect the data for food costs, because that's how they figure out like SNAP benefits. That's how they figure out housing benefits. And then they also collect the data on the average cost of gas. So now we have a simple source for that. We take those three numbers, add them together. That's how much you should do in a month for the 50%. And then the other 20, 30, all you do is take that number and double it.
Mm.
And then you add in your local taxes, your state taxes, your federal taxes, and you come up with this is the final number. So it's a very straightforward, simple process to do. And then I use that as this should be the baseline wage for anyone who wants to work. And then from there, by establishing that flat floor, and it allows people to meet all of their needs set by the understanding was it would allow all people to meet their needs set by Maslow. And then
Mm.
with that floor, we can add in like your job requires a bachelor's degree. Well, we know how much the average person pays for their loans for a bachelor's degree. That is added into the needs, and now we have a new number for employers who require a bachelor's degree. We have a new number for employers who require a master's degree or any other training, and we can just like we can build on that, because now we have a flat floor with easy accessible numbers.
And have you found that those numbers in practical terms, because I remember when I was in the US that you first of all have Congress, you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, we have Congress still debating on the $15 an hour wage.
Oh, yeah, what I found was it ended up it was like the study. What I did was I looked at it for an individual, and I also looked at it for an average family, because okay, we want to, instead of a single bedroom apartment, if it's an average family, you want a two-bedroom apartment, right?
Mm-hmm.
One for your kids, one for the adults. It increased your food costs and stuff like that, and then compared that to what the actual numbers were. And what I didn't realize at the time was, but after when I was delivering the dissertation, is it ended up being a generational study, because when I did it the study was from 2000 to 2020, right?
It's 20
Um,
years. And I
yep,
think they have found that there hasn't been much of an increase in the minimum wage in a span of a decade or two.
yep.
However,
Well,
inflation
it's not that
has,
there hasn't been
sorry, go
it's not
ahead.
that there hasn't been an increase in wages. It's that what it ended up showing was that millennials just getting into the workforce were heavily under that ethical wage, and Generation X, which is their generation, was
Yes.
barely making it.
Mm.
Yep, they were barely making that ethical wage, and it was constantly like the whole everybody entering the workforce that you would expect to enter the workforce, th- their wages stayed very far under. And I wasn't looking at what the minimum wage was. I was looking at what the actual average or median wage was. Just
Mm.
comparing what that median wage was to the what should be expected to be a budgetable wage.
Right.
And it was completely undermining itself. And it was
Yes,
showing that
because you have
as young
inflation.
people enter the workforce,
Mm.
the that's the catch. The ethical wage keeps up with inflation, or when I was establishing it, it kept up with inflation because it kept the costs up. The government was tracking that.
Right.
But the wages itself didn't increase. And then like I said, I looked at families too, and that was the sadder part because what I compared it to was the average dual income home, and the dual income homes over that span of time actually lost money.
Wow.
Like their actual take home pay went down, and it was it that and in real numbers. Everybody else went up, but the dual income wage, that for them, that ethical wage encroached and surpassed, and their actual wage went down. And it was I didn't realize that my the chair of my committee was like, if you're not depressed when you start looking at the data and analyzing it, you didn't find a problem. And the goal of this is to find problems and come up with solutions. So it was a major problem that has yet to actually be addressed. So
What
that's
role
that's
can
where that
corporate
stuff comes
what role can
from. Hmm?
corporate play in this? Because they obviously, I think corporate America is the
Well,
biggest employer.
the corporate America and the government are the big employers.
Hmm.
The problem comes in is that in corporate America invests a lot of money to not address the problem. That's one of the ethical in the book, what I transitioned it to is, instead of arguing about an ethical wage, it should be a community supporting wage, because Walmart is one of the largest employers in the country, but they pay their people so little that they actually like they were known for handed out, this is how to get on government subsidy things, this is how to get on SNAP benefits. We know we're not paying you enough, but we're still making bank. like, that has been a big problem for a very long time. Um, and it's the fight. We're in a very big struggle against it. It's impacted the value. What it, the way I frame it in the book is, you have the employer and the employee, and what you have is competing um, resources. The employer values money. That's
Of
their
course.
number one thing. They want to make profit. They want to make money. The employee values time. I want to be home with my family.
Mm.
I'm going to dedicate what I can to get what I want, but I want to be with my family. I want to be with my community. I want to hang out with my friends. So the exchange what's off balance in that core relationship is the employers, especially at the corporate side, at the big employer side, they don't value their employees' time, because they're able, because of the profits they're making, they're able to wait for the employee who's willing to take the low wage, that needs to take it. So that huge imbalance between valuing time versus money is part of the imbalance in the employer employee relationship.
And part of the employer not being ethical.
Yep. They're not acting ethically because they're undermining the communities that they hire from.
Mm.
One of the things that the employers need is they need a well-trained workforce, so they depend on public education, but then they undermine education because they're not paying employees enough wages to make sure that the tax base is strong for the schools. Like that, and that's where like it feeds into so many other things.
Yeah, the
But
ripple effect, yes. And
yep,
so the question becomes, and this has been happening for a long time. I'm sure these conversations have been
yeah.
held
I
for
just I've only
years.
did my yep,
Mm.
I've only done my study over 20 years, and I it was well established. Like what I was looking at is this is a well ingrained thing. So like
The question is,
I
who's
could go
going to
back
come up
further.
with the solution and what is the solution to this? Because people are barely
Well,
making it.
it's that's where the book comes from. It's like the solution. We have a issue with sometimes we overcomplicate things, um, and we want to dig deeper into other little parts. But sometimes, like, um, it's just getting people informed and not like talking down to people. My book was written for. I wrote it for the average, just an average worker. That's like I'm trying to. I don't know how to frame how I feel, but I know things are off. Where
Yeah.
I'm working, I know things are off. So it was written for that person who doesn't have any experience in HR, who doesn't have any experience in like doing big stuff. It was written so that people, your average worker, could just pick up something and then go, "This is a nice way to frame my argument. I get it. Like I get it." And it doesn't talk down to them. It gives them examples in the real world. It gives them just a framework to build their thoughts around. And that's
Mhm.
where like defining work ethic and then defining the employment ethics, the four pillars of each of those and how they interact. Defining using Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which tends to be a very common principle, is a core component to it. So that way it's something we can build on and build an understanding of. And then pointing out that these things already exist.
Right.
That was something that like when we talk about work ethic, people have like an image in their head already of that, right? Um, I define it, but everybody has a little image of like, oh yeah, everybody wants a strong work ethic. My
Mm.
argument is no, we want to. You can't say strong if you don't understand what basic is. So what is a basic work ethic? And then if when I say employment ethics, that gets a little nebulous because we've spent so much time shouldering that work ethic, but not defining the counterpoint. So it's just a straightforward discussion between the two.
Right. Since you teach college students and you say your book is for the layman, have they gotten hold of the book and what are their thoughts on the things that you've discovered on your research?
So the book just came out over the summer, and what I teach in college has little to do with what I wrote about.
Oh, okay.
Um, I I am a my favorite one of my favorite philosophers is Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was a philosophy teacher, and the story goes that one day he was being followed around by a bunch of his followers, just like, hey, how can we be better philosophers? And they're begging him for input on how to like be better and philosophize better. And he told them build a brick wall. There's enough philosophy people out here. Build a brick wall. You can only really talk like understand life if you live it. So you should work
Right.
with your hands.
That's true.
And that was what he stood for, was like, if you really want to change the world, you need to put in the work. And so like I don't teach leadership. I actively didn't want to teach it. I teach industrial maintenance. I have a very technical background
Hmm.
that funded my education. But it it makes it so that instead of me talking to people, or instead of me teaching people who think they want to be leaders, I'm actively developing people who are going to be leaders in the like at the level that I'm talking about. These are
Right.
guys who are like I tell them like make sure you're doing safety first. When they're I'm the first person to pat you on the back if something goes wrong. We're all mercenaries. If somebody offers you a better job, go chase that money. You know.
Take
So,
the bag. Yeah.
but it's and when I talk to my my counterparts in the corporate world who are like in HR and stuff, and they're talking about like why can't we hire anybody, and like we can't keep anybody here, and it's like that's because you're not doing the things you need to do. When you're undermining all of the structures that would build um, a desire to stay with your company, when you're saying, okay, we're getting rid of retirement packages and we're not really keeping up with inflation on wages and we're doing this and we're doing that, you're just justifying them leaving. And the other side to it is a lot of white collar workers don't understand that they were depending on blue collar not moving around, but white collar was allowed. And I'm like, it just took a few decades, but the blue collar guys learned the lesson that the white collar guys knew the whole time. If I
Mm.
don't, I'm not going to stay here for a promotion that might happen in 10, 15 years if I can get a promotion tomorrow.
That
That's
makes
a that's a
sense.
white
Yeah.
that's a white collar mentality. Why can't the blue collars do the same?
Same thing. Yep. Yeah, that is so true.
It's
Why not? And the opportunities are there. Now let's talk about the
yep.
four pillars of ethics.
hmm there are there's four pillars in each side of the equation. Like I said, I defined it in the book. It work ethic, it's productivity, um, reliability, autonomy, and collaboration. I need to know that you're going to show up on time. You're going to do what you're told. All employment is a team thing. Even if it's a company with one employee, you still got to work with the person who hired you. Um, and you got to actively like provide a service, make something that actually will make money, right? So those are the four pillars of work ethic. And one thing that's overlooked oftentimes is who is able to hold the accountability on that. That's the employer. If I don't meet any of those pillars, the employer can fire me, right? On the flip side is the four pillars of employment ethics. That is a safe and secure workspace, a community supporting wage, a responsible impact on your surrounding environment, and my favorite one, which is an accountable professional relationship. We're not friends. I have enough friends. I'm the oldest of six in my parent. I have family. Like, I don't need these things. I need us. I'm here to make money, go home, and hang out with the people I want to. We need to have a professional relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? The catch is employees, unless you're in a very unionized country, employees don't have a lot of power in holding employers accountable for those four pillars. The people, employees, depend on the government to hold the industry and businesses accountable. For example, safe and secure workspace, that's OSHA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the community supporting wages, that's labor and wages division. Responsible impact on the surrounding environment, that's the EPA. Making sure and that one's actually really important because if your employer is poisoning the environment
The
around them,
environment. Yes.
they're also that's you want an employer to really take that seriously because they're not just poisoning you, they're poisoning their legacy, they're poisoning their potential workforce in the future, right? so that
Reminds me
so
of
when
the movie Aaron Brockovich. Yeah.
Yep. So if you're poisoning your future workforce, you're limiting your legacy,
Mm.
you're limiting your growth. So that one's really important. Like I said, my favorite one is the accountable professional relationship. That's the communication and all that stuff too, but that's controlled by the EEOC. Um, and that's we want to make sure that like biases and stuff are minimized. We're not being discriminatory in any way. We're having a pro. My views are not impacting you. Your views aren't impacting me. We're having a professional relationship.
Mm-hmm.
At asking anything more from an employee is putting on guilt to get the employee what you
Not
what you want.
necessary at all. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
since you've been doing this work for such a long time, what have you noticed have been the generational differences when it comes to ethics and employment dynamics?
This whole this last transition where I'm at now, with how I'm viewing things, started with me when I started actually teaching, which was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was in the workforce, I didn't have this kind of framework, and I was like, oh, I'm doing all this extra work, and it's just normal. It's just like I got a job, I'm gonna do all this extra stuff. Put up with a lot of stuff. Um, my second year of teaching, what happened was we had an employer, big employer, come in to like try to recruit some of my students. They went through their spiel, talked about how successful the company was, how big they were, they're international, all this stuff. And my students started like one student at the beginning raised their hand, and they're like, "Yeah, what do you want?" And he goes, "Is your building air conditioned?" And they went, "No." "Why not? You talked about how you made over $500 million last year. Is it too expensive to put an air conditioner in?" That's the air conditioner in the Midwest. Like that's actually really important because if you have a 100-degree day with high humidity, like so you're telling me that your employee safety isn't really important. And as soon as that little gap started open, everyone just started asking all, hey, do you depend on overtime? Yes. Why? What do you mean? Well, overtime is if you're paying overtime and you're still making money, that means that you could be paying me that overtime wage for 8 hours of work. Why aren't you paying me that
Mm.
8? Like it's like it was brutal, and I'm just sitting there in the corner, like there's a little part of me that was just clapping and cheering him on, and there's a part of me that's like, these guys are breaking everything that I thought. And
But that's good though, because I think more than anything, so much of what you've shared today, there's so much that employees of both government and corporations they literally should speak up on this. There's a lot of conversations that should be
mhm,
had when it comes to these issues because a lot of people are unhappy, are struggling, and yet corporations, I mean, look at the CEO debate. CEOs are making
yep,
hundreds of millions of
yep,
bonuses while the
and
employees are
it's
struggling with two jobs.
yep, and like the catch is with some of this stuff, especially when I talk about the community supporting wage. Like I'm not against people making money, but the catch is like I know that the owners of Walmart are not going to spend money in the towns around me. I live in
Mm.
rural Wisconsin, northern rural Wisconsin. They're not coming here to spend money. So if they're so I depend my community depends on those employees to spend their Walmart wages. And if they're not making enough to support the community, all the small shops that sell things that Walmart doesn't sell, all these small mom and pop shops in these niche communities, they're not able to support themselves. And that's where that big problem lies is I like I said, I'm not against people making their wages, but they need we need to have an understanding that the super wealthy CEOs are not going like Johnny Appleseed from village to village throwing out money. They're not
If
doing it. They're
only.
trying to get the bottom dollar for what they can get.
That is
And
unfortunate.
by doing
Yeah.
so they're making it so that they are the big dog in the area, and if I want to compete, I'm not competing with the local stores. I'm competing with an international brand who can undermine my sales and then go, "Whoops, we closed down 4 stores.
And they're
I guess
proud of it too
the
sometimes.
sales
Yeah.
need can go away."
Yes. What would be your last words of wisdom?
Um my last words of wisdom when it comes to employment ethics and all that stuff, um my biggest what I've been trying to get people to understand is that they they need to take responsibility by putting up their initial small fights. Like you
Mm.
don't take on additional responsibilities that you don't need to. If someone's fired and then they or quits or retires and then they look at you and say, "Well, you can take this on temporarily." No, because if we've learned anything over the last few decades, temporary is permanent.
Yep.
And when you leave, the funny thing is a lot of the time it's either you leave and they try to employers have tried to move that responsibility you had onto somebody else, or they realize that their workforce is so overworked they can't, and then they have to hire like three people to do that one person's job. Like we really need to start putting down like I I'm not going to be doing like I am at capacity, I am not doing more. And
Mm.
it's something that has to go throughout. That's where I don't identify like people working on the front line. Um the bus boy at the at the restaurant. It's anyone who is employed. Middle managers need to be looking at people and be like looking up and going, we can't we I am not going to put more on these people who are depending me. And then their level like it needs to be a bottom up push, but every level needs to recognize that those at the top are really exploiting us, all of us. Um,
Absolutely. Yep.
and by making the art, we're constantly making the argument that like people at the bottom, like oh, the constant argument of these people aren't worth their money. What you end up arguing is you're worth less. These are entry level wages. So you're saying you're worth less. Instead of saying I'm worth more, everyone is in a circle arguing you're worth less.
That is
And by doing that,
very sad.
you're putting money into the pockets of the people at the very top because the only people that benefits is the people at the top. Because if
Unfortunately,
I'm
that's
worth
how it
less,
is. Yeah.
yep. If I'm
Yeah.
worth less and you're worth less and everyone else is worth less, the ones at the top are the only ones that benefit. And I just keep
Unfortunately.
telling
Yeah.
people you need to stop saying who's worth less and you need to point at your boss and go, "You're worth more. His boss is worth more. We are all worth more." And that's the fight that's ahead of us.
And should definitely take that up. And before you go, please share with us again your book and your website details.
My book is Employment Ethics, redefining the employee-employer relationship, but it's looking up employment ethics. It's available on online at most stores in ebook format, and you can buy physical copies. Um, there is my website is FTS Leaders. Um, it's and you can get link there. There are links to that as
Mhm.
well as like I have little TikToks that I've put on there about employment ethics and other conversations I've had around it. So yeah,
Certainly much needed. Employment ethics and
It's FTS
FTS
leaders
leaders.
is FTS
FTS
leaders is from
leaders.
the shed,
Right.
from the shed leaders. So
FTS Leaders by Travis Schachtner. Thank you so
mhm.
much for this conversation. Very much needed. It affects so many people, and I know that they will benefit from your insights today. We appreciate you, Travis. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.